Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we pot up some seedlings and just talk about seedling care. So let's go. It is the end of March and I am in the middle of seed starting, potting up seedlings, starting more seeds, and I just wanted to make this garden vlog. I was here working on seedlings and I figured I might as well turn the camera on and chat with you a little bit about what's going on in my grow room, lots of questions that have been asked, and any other things I can think about when it comes to my garden. And feel free to listen along and do whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you're potting up seedlings or cooking a nice meal. Perhaps you're working out in your garden. And as always, feel free to ask any questions or drop comments below. I love hearing from you and I love helping you however I can. You might be wondering what this is. I'm just going to be bottom watering seedlings while I'm working. And the first thing we're going to start with is potting up some tomato seeds. In fact, they're tomato seeds that I had pre-sprouted. And the reason I pre-sprouted them was 4 days ago, I started a bunch of tomatoes from seed. I made a video and I shared that with you. And then I found another packet of seeds. The tomato variety is Cherokee Purple, and some of you had highly recommended that variety to me. So when I found the seed packet, I said, oh, I better get them started. What I did in that case was I took a paper towel and I laid the seeds on it. I folded the paper towel in half, and then I just put it in this tin foil. And I marked it Cherokee Purple, and I had started these seeds on March 21st. And then I took this and I put this on my seedling heat mat, which runs at about 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason I did that is there's certain plants like peppers as well as tomatoes that really can benefit from bottom heat. And even though my house generally stays around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, I wanted them to get that additional consistent heat. It's only been about 3 or 4 days, and I wanted to show you what the seeds look like now. Well, the seeds have started to germinate, and since they are taking off, it's time for me to go ahead and get them in some soil. The longer I wait, then it's not good for the seeds. What will end up happening is they're going to start rooting inside of the paper towel. And by the way, I didn't have to use paper towel. I could have used something like a coffee filter, and then there's less chance of the roots going inside the coffee filter. But nevertheless, as soon as you start seeing the little tails appearing on the seeds, it's always good to start potting them up. Could I have taken these seeds and sown them directly into, let's say, a restaurant takeout container or a 6-cell pack? Absolutely. But honestly, that day, it was just so easy for me to take the seeds, scatter them on here, throw them in this, and put this on the seedling heat mat. There are so many different ways you can start seeds. There's no right or wrong. But if you are running out of space, this is one method that you could try. Of course, it's a temporary method because now I need to go ahead and pot these up, and these will take more space under my grow lights, but it's all good. I'll be potting up the seeds in pre-moistened potting mix. I like to make my own potting mix. It's 4 parts of peat moss, but you can use cocoa coir. I mix in 1 part of perlite as well as 1 part of vermiculite. And then I sprinkle the top with a little bit of garden lime. And the reason I do that is to offset the pH because peat moss can be very acidic. If you're gonna use cocoa coir, you don't need to use the garden lime. And then I poured boiling hot water, mixed it all in, and let it cool down. The reason I like to use boiling water is to kill off the chance of any fungus gnat eggs that might be in there. And now my potting mix is pre-moistened and it's ready for me to use. And in case you're wondering, what am I bottom watering over here? These are just some impatiens that I had started from seed, and they were started from seeds that I like to collect myself. As my plants get bigger, I will be bottom watering them in the 10 by 20 trays. But right now, they're still pretty small, so I'm taking it by a case-by-case basis when it comes to my 6-cell packs, but eventually I will be bottom watering them fully in trays like this so that all the 6-cell packs get watered at the same time. And since tomato seeds don't need to be planted very deep, I'm just going to use this pen, and I'm just making a small hole that's probably about a 1/4 inch deep. I'm going to place each seed in there and then cover it up. And I'm going to wear my reading glasses because the seeds are actually pretty small. And I only want to pot up the seeds that have started to sprout. The ones that haven't started to sprout, they might as well just stay inside of here because you know how it is. Sometimes some seeds, for whatever reason, are not going to sprout at all. So why waste a cell if I don't need to? So while I'm potting up, I'm just going to be chit-chatting about a bunch of things. So let's first start with potting up. I've heard from a number of you about the whole situation when it comes to potting up and running out of space. And one question that someone asked me recently was, why do I pot up from a restaurant takeout container? As many of you know, I do like to mass sow or multi-sow seeds in restaurant takeout containers. and then pot up from there. And the question was, why don't I just leave the seedlings in there and leave them there until it's time to bring the seedlings outside to put them in the garden? The reason is that the seedlings are going to compete. I usually heavily sow my seeds in those containers. And so as the plants start germinating, they're going to be competing for space in there. And that's not good, because what will happen is a lot of the plants will not get the nutrients, they will not get the light, they're not going to get what they need to get bigger and grow stronger. So it is very important to allow them to have that space that they need. And that's the reason why you want to get them out of that restaurant container. Now, because I sow very heavily, I need to bump up my seedlings pretty quickly. If you only sowed a very small amount of seeds inside of a restaurant takeout container, then your plants could stay in your restaurant takeout container longer. Another question has been about fertilizer. Why don't I add fertilizer into my potting mix when I make my own potting mix? That is something that I will be researching a little bit more. I know that M.I. Gardner, for example, has trifecta, which I've heard is a great fertilizer to mix into potting mix. In fact, I think that's what he does. However, I don't want to just depend on one person's fertilizer. I want to be able to get that fertilizer from different sources, maybe from big box stores or from Amazon. So it's something that I want to spend a little bit more time on. So until then, what I'm doing still for this year is I am giving my own fertilizer in the form of a liquid fertilizer. So about once a week, my seedlings get fertilizer through when I'm bottom watering. And when it comes to flowers, I personally like to use Miracle Grow. And when it comes to my vegetable seedlings, I've been using Espoma Grow. I was using fish emulsion, which I think should still be fine, and I still plan to use it because I have it. I just don't want to use it for lettuce, because what I noticed was with my lettuce, it was tasting fishy. And so it's not really something that my husband or I were enjoying very much. So we switched over to Espoma Grow, and it's been better. So I prefer to use organic fertilizers for my vegetable starts, and I'm okay using Miracle Grow for my flower seedlings. For right now, just looking down and potting up these few seeds, I'm almost done, and then I can move on and start chatting with you a little bit more without looking down the whole time, so I apologize. And in this video, I am going to be just jumping around with all different questions that I've been asked, or I'll just be chatting about topics that I think are important to share. The next thing I want to talk about is starting our seeds and the right time to start them. There was a time when I used to think I had to start my plants very early in order to get a nice, big, huge plant to put out in the garden. And what I learned over time was if you start your seeds too early, then what's going to happen is the plant is actually going to not do so well in your garden. So there's a reason why on the seed packets, they give you an idea of when to start seeds. I've learned the hard way, and I think we all have probably. For example, I think a great example is with tomatoes. A lot of times you can go to a garden center and buy those big, huge tomato plants, and they're like $15 or $20, and you think you're going to get your tomatoes earlier. And a good experiment to try is then to buy small little tomato plants, plant them out at the same exact time, and you might be surprised that those small plants will take right off, and the large one that you bought for a lot of money might not actually produce tomatoes any sooner. So that's something very important to keep in mind. And I've seen it myself with, like, for example, flowers. I want those nice big flowers like you see at the garden center. But then I have to remind myself, well, I don't have, like, this is not a greenhouse. This is just inside my house. And what I've seen personally is, for example, with my impatiens as well as my wax begonias, because they take so long to start from seed, it was last year that I started them even earlier than normal. And what ended up happening was the plants were hitting the grow lights. And the grow lights couldn't be raised anymore. They were already at the highest setting. And then when it was time to bring the plants out to harden them off, they were falling over, they were splitting, they were not happy. So that's why it's very important to start your seeds at the right time. And it's easy to get influenced when we're watching YouTube videos, when we see other people starting their seeds. But we have to remember, we all live in different areas. So you want to know what your average last frost date is, and then count backwards depending on when that seed should be started. The other thing I've learned is when it comes to seed packets, not everyone gives you all the information that you need. So it's always good to do a search on the internet and really know information about that seed as you're sowing it. And I highly recommend you start keeping track of your seed starting. Do it however works for you. For me, I like to do it online. I use Google Drive, and I just created a spreadsheet and I keep track of it in there. And I have columns for each different year, only for the last like 3 or 4 years. And then I adjust accordingly. Like if I know that I started a seed too early, then I'll put a note in there so that the next year I know not to start it early again. But I can tell you a number of years ago, over 20 years ago, when I was starting seeds and I didn't have any grow lights, I was just putting all my seed starts in a sunny window. I didn't know much about the fact that you need to be starting seeds at a certain time. I just would start them all at the same time. And I remember I would bring plants to my parents' house to plant out on Mother's Day, because every year I used to plant plants at my parents' house on Mother's Day. And my plants would be so tiny, like the annual flowers would be so, so small. It was almost embarrassing. Well, I've learned over the years, and even though my parents have passed away, I know they're watching down upon me and they see that I've learned. So um, I do like to teach that it's important to know when to start your plants so that you have nice, healthy, happy plants when you plant them out in your yard. So there are seeds still left in here that have not germinated yet. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on my seedling heat mat. And I don't need to give this a spritz of water because it still feels damp. You don't want to put too much water on here because it will rot your seeds, but you also don't want this to dry out, because if the seed was just barely starting to germinate and it dries out, it's going to die. Years ago, we had old Venetian blinds and we went ahead and we cut them right up, and that's what's in this bag. And I like to use these for making labels a lot of times for my pots. It's a nice, cheap, easy way to do it. You can really use anything. I know some people have taken their yogurt containers and they've cut out strips that way. Or if you have red Solo cups, you can take and cut that up into strips. Lots of different things you can use to make your own labels. This is a 1-gallon jug here, and it has this mesh bag inside of it. What I've been doing is I've been putting 4 tablespoons of what are called mosquito bits. Mosquito bits help with fungus gnats. I've had a lot of success this year with the battle against fungus gnats. And because my grow room is in my house, it's right next to my kitchen, I really can't stand having a lot of fungus gnats in my house. Now, if my grow room was in my basement, or if I was growing plants in a greenhouse, then maybe it wouldn't bother me so much. But to be honest with you, when it comes to fungus gnats, the actual adults that fly around, they're not harmful. They're just a super nuisance and a pain. It's the larvae that are in our pots and our containers. If you have very young, very small plants, what happens is the larvae feed on the roots and they can kill those very young plants. So it is important to have control over those fungus gnats. And what I've been doing this year that's worked well for me is every time I water with the mosquito bits mixed in. And again, it's 4 tablespoons mixed into 1 gallon. And I feel that's been helping. Now, I know there are so many other different things that you can try to get control of the fungus gnat situation, but that's what's worked for me. I buy a nice big bag of the mosquito bits off of Amazon, although I think you can buy it from local garden centers. The mosquito bits, coupled with pouring the boiling water on my peat moss, I think has helped a lot. The purpose for the yellow sticky traps is to catch the adult fungus gnats that might be flying around. And so far, I've only found 2 or 3, so it hasn't been bad. The other thing I'm also doing is mixing in my fertilizer inside my 1 gallon of my water here. So always read your directions when it comes to adding fertilizer. But when it comes to very small, very young seedlings, you don't want to use a full strength. You always want to use a half a strength of whatever is written on the directions for your fertilizer. The next thing I'm going to be working on is rosemary. I had a bunch of rosemary seeds. They've been in my fridge a little too long. They really should have come out, and I should have sprinkled them already on the seed starting mix that's in this container here. So I just want to go ahead and do that. I want to mention, when it comes to rosemary seeds, I've tried it both ways, and this is my first year growing rosemary from seed. And they were pretty fresh seeds. They were from last year. So I took a packet of seeds and I sprinkled them on top of my seed starting mix, which was pre-moistened. I sprayed them. I covered them with the humidity dome. I put them on a seedling heat mat, and they sprouted wonderfully. But I also cold stratified some seeds because I had heard that you should be cold stratifying them. And I did the same exact process after I cold stratified the seeds for about 10 days. And I found that it didn't matter, that the seeds still germinated fine. But if you're having trouble with your rosemary seeds sprouting, you could try to cold stratify them first or just buy some fresh seeds. But I did make a video showing my process for starting rosemary from seed, and I'll link that down below. One of the issues that I ran into with the cold stratification of the seeds is they end up with like a coating around them. And when you try to remove the seed off of the paper towel and put it on the seed starting mix, that it's like a slimy coating that's around it, and it's very sticky. It makes it very hard to get them off of the paper towel and onto the seed starting mix. So this morning, what I was experimenting, and it was working pretty well. I just took my pen. I love this red pen, but you could use whatever you want. And I just was taking the seeds and getting them to stick. And it's not 100% all the time, but there, it got on here. It's very easy. And now I can just kind of roll the pen on the seed starting mix, and it's transferred off of the paper towel and onto the seed starting mix. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. I was trying to use a toothpick, I was trying to use my fingers, and nothing was working. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just be working on this now. I'm gonna be transferring all the seeds off of this paper towel and onto the seed starting mix. And the other thing I did want to mention is I'm noticing right now on my seed starting mix that there's some algae on here. It's like a green color, and you might notice it when you're starting seeds. And sometimes if you've put vermiculite on there, you might be wondering, wait, I put vermiculite, which is to help retain moisture. Why is it getting all this algae on there? And in my case, I don't sprinkle vermiculite on top of my, when I'm doing seed starting, and I still get the algae. And the reason that you get the algae is because of overwatering. And, you know, when it comes to starting seeds, that's very tricky. You don't want to underwater, and overwatering just happens. I think it's human nature for anyone that's starting seeds. Typically, when it comes to overwatering, we're not going to kill our seedlings. A lot of times they'll be fine, but you will end up getting the algae. And at least from my experience, and this is what I tell a lot of people, even though the algae is unsightly, it's kind of upsetting to see the green on top, it's usually not going to kill your seedlings. So I guess what I'm saying is don't worry too much about that if you are noticing the algae. Now, if it was a lot of algae, like a ton of algae, and you started seeing your seedlings reverting backwards, not looking good or dying, then maybe it's an issue. But at least for me, whenever I've had algae on top of my potting mix or my seed starting mix, it has not adversely affected my seedlings. So I just wanted to pass that along. This time of year can definitely be overwhelming, and I want you to know that. It's definitely overwhelming for me, so it might be overwhelming for you also, because you have a lot of seedlings that you're growing that are taking off, and you're having to pot them up, but then you also have more seeds that you want to start, but you're running out of room, and what should you do? I think a lot of us are feeling that right now, including me. So I wanted to throw that out there. And if you're wondering, so how do I do it? How do I get around that? What I've been doing for years, and it works for me, is in the mornings, I will sit here. A lot of times I'll have my laptop and I'll be watching YouTube videos, and I might have my cup of coffee here. And I try to relax and enjoy the process of potting up, because I do enjoy potting up plants. And during that same time, I might be bottom watering seedlings. And I try to just set small little goals for myself. Like, okay, today I am just going to pot up a whole tray of snapdragons, let's say. And because I sow so many seeds in those restaurant takeout containers, I do try to tell myself, how many plants will I be happy with? Because sometimes in those restaurant takeout containers, there might be hundreds of seeds that have germinated. And even though I want to save all of them, it's, first of all, I don't have the room for all those plants. And second of all, I don't have the time to pot up all those plants. So I try to tell myself, what would I be happy with? It might be a full tray of plants. So it might be like 72 plants. And as sad as it is to see seedlings die, we have to be realistic with ourselves too. And I've mentioned this before, a lot of the seeds that I start are seeds that I collected myself. And many times those seeds are tiny, like snapdragons or impatiens or begonias. There's no way to really just count how many seeds I'm planting. Although I know with certain seeds, like maybe with the snapdragons, I could use a wet toothpick and sow them individually to ensure that I'm not sowing too many. But it's just easier for me to sow a bunch of seeds and then prick them out. Now, if I spent a lot of money on my seeds, like some fancy snapdragon seeds, then I would want to save all those seeds. Maybe it's 50 seeds or 100 seeds. But generally, for me, that's not the case. My seeds are seeds that I've collected or I did buy, but I bought them from Dollar Tree. I bought them locally, so they might only be a few dollars for a packet of seeds. And then there are some times when I'm not just doing the small little potting up type of thing. I have bigger plants that need to be potted up into bigger pots. And those are fun things to do, let's say at night when I'm tired. I've worked out in the yard all day and I just want to do something that's like instant gratification. And a lot of times I'll do that at nighttime, is just say, okay, I'm going to pot up a full tray of 3-inch pots, which would only be, let's say, 18 plants I need to pot up. That's usually a good thing to do at night. And I know right now I actually have some plants that need to be potted up. I have some impatiens that I got from the Dollar Tree that have gotten quite large. Those need to be potted up. And then I also have some petunias that need to be potted up. So I'm holding off, and that would be a good thing for me to work on at nighttime. And potting mix can get expensive. And even though I make my own, I've only been making my own potting mix for, I think it's been 3 years now. Prior to that, I used to buy Pro Mix. And when you buy a big bale of Pro Mix, that goes a long way. But you can definitely use whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. But there will be a point where if you're buying a small bag of potting mix, but you're doing a lot of seed starting, it gets pretty expensive. So you might have to start looking into other types of ways to save money when it comes to potting mix because you're potting up plants. I wanted to talk a little bit about winter sowing because I know a lot of you are winter sowing for the first time. I've gotten some questions about the fact that seedlings are germinating, but you're still getting freezing temperatures at night, and what should you do? One thing you don't want to do is bring those plants inside, pot them up, and put them under your grow lights. One of the main purposes for winter sowing is to be able to get nice, strong, healthy plants, plants that are already acclimated to the environment outside. And if you have Facebook, there is a Facebook group. I'm going to post the link right now on the screen. And that group is just awesome. They answer so many questions. And I have to tell you, no matter how many people on YouTube are making videos on winter sowing, I really like that Facebook group. There's a woman, her first name is Trudy. She's basically the inventor, I guess you would call it, of winter sowing. And because it hasn't been around forever, it's been around for a number of years. It's a very good group and it answers a lot of questions. So I highly recommend, if you're on Facebook, to check out that group, join it. And there's a section on there, I think it's called Guides. And under the guide section, there are a lot of questions and answers having to do with when can you start your seeds and what kind of containers can you use for winter sowing? What happens if seeds start germinating and you have frost coming? Every single thing is out there that you might want to know when it comes to winter sowing. In my case, when it comes to winter sowing, I've been doing it for 3 years, and the last few years, I only did perennials. But I will be making some videos soon where I'm doing some additional winter sowing in the spring. We did have, and we continue to have, some nights that are in the low 20-degree Fahrenheit range. And what I did, just to be safe, I had a few milk jugs that started to sprout. And they were alyssum and bachelor's button. Now, they might have been okay. Our temperatures, again, are in the low 20-degree Fahrenheit. But I don't want to take a chance. So what I've been doing is bringing just those few milk jugs into my unheated garage, which stays about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. But then during the day, when it is warmer, I bring the milk jugs back out. I don't want to set back my seedlings either. I don't want them to then have a hard time because then I'm going to have to harden off everything again. So I'm just bringing them in at night when it's really cold, and then I bring them out during the day. But I'm not doing that with anything that has not sprouted, which I started a bunch of perennials using winter sowing. They haven't sprouted yet. And even if they had just barely sprouted, I think they would be okay. But I'm definitely not bringing them in. They're all staying outside during these freezing cold nights. And I'm also at this point checking them to make sure that they're not getting dry. And you definitely want to be doing that. Lift up your container, whatever container you used for winter sowing, and make sure that they're not drying out, because that's not good either. You want to make sure that they're getting moisture. We continue to get rain, and in fact, today we're supposed to be getting some snow. So I know that they're getting the moisture they need. And the couple of warm days that we had when it was 60-ish degree Fahrenheit, I was lifting them and picking them up, and they felt nice and heavy. Some questions that I've had also have to do with potting up, because I know some people do not love to pot up, and I totally get that. So some of the questions have been basically, can't you just plant a seed in a big pot, like a 3-inch pot to start with? I've never liked to do that. And the reason is you just don't have as much control over that water that that seed needs. In other words, when you have little pots like this, then you're just giving these little plants what they need. But if you took a small little seed, like again, impatiens, begonia, and you planted it in a 3-inch pot, because you just don't want to pot up, you just don't want to deal with that whole process. It's very, very hard to monitor the water situation and what that seed or what that little tiny plant needs. So I do like to baby my plants and pot them up slowly, incrementally, versus just try to skip a few steps and put them in big, huge pots right off the bat. And I will always recommend that it's better to do it that way than it is to just try to take the shortcuts and just put seeds in a bigger pot than they really need to be. Even using the pen, taking these little seeds off of here and transferring them is so tedious. I just had so much luck when I originally just took the seeds and sprinkled them and the rosemary germinated. But again, because I had heard that rosemary is one of those plants that is hard to germinate, that's why I also chose to cold stratify some, just to make sure I covered my bases. In terms of what is growing so far in my yard, and as a reminder, I live in New Hampshire, I garden in USDA Zone 5B, and my average last frost date is May 15th. So I'm still about 8 weeks away from my average last frost date. I don't have a whole lot that has started blooming in my yard yet, but I will share the few things that are blooming. The snowdrops have started to come up. In fact, last year together we moved them, and I like to move a lot of my spring bulbs in the green. So we had moved those together, and they're right now near my side walkway, and they're looking really pretty. I also have some yellow crocus that have started to come up. I also moved those in the green last year because I had a lot of spring bulbs that were in temporary holding spots, so I wanted to make sure I moved them into areas where I could enjoy them. And the yellow crocus are blooming in my rose garden right now. And then my hellebores, they're not blooming, but they are just starting to show their buds. And I've made videos showing you my process for dividing my hellebores. I do like to divide hellebores because they're very expensive, and I like to get free plants. I think we all like to get free plants. So if you have hellebores, don't be afraid to divide them. And other than that, I do have a lot of things that are popping up, but nothing else that's blooming in my yard right now. The only other thing that has some buds on it are some pansies. I have what I call a pansy holding bed in my yard, and I basically had just planted some pansies there a number of years ago, and then they went to seed probably during the summertime, and the plants established a little bit, and then the following spring I suddenly had a whole bunch of pansies pop up, and that cycle has continued for the last many years, which has been a lot of fun to get free pansies that way. So I do have some buds on those pansies, and very soon I'll be working out in the garden, and I'll show you how I clean up the flower beds. So far, I have cleaned up one area of my yard out in the front yard. I did start cleaning up there, and I didn't bring you along, but I'll be sure to bring you along when I clean up some of my flower beds. And I'll also bring you along when I start working in my backyard plant nursery. This is my 3rd year having my plant nursery, and I've been going down there and checking the plants out, and they're waking up, they're looking good. So I do need to go down there and do some basic maintenance, which involves cutting back perennials and just general weeding, almost like you would do in your normal flower bed, but I need to do that to my plant nursery. And starting in mid-April is when I'm hoping to open up my plant nursery for sales again. So if you can believe it, even though it's the end of March, I will be potting up some more spring bulbs in pots and containers. I did a bunch during I want to say it was probably January and February. And I had kept those pots in my garage. And my garage does not freeze. It stays about 40 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter months. And many of those bulbs started to still sprout and they want to be outside. They want to be getting some real daylight. But like I mentioned, we still have temperatures that are quite cold. So the bulbs have been coming out during the warm days. I put them on a rolling cart that I have, but then they come back in at night, which is kind of unfortunate because I really want them on my porch. So I did purposely hold back on planting all of my spring bulbs. So pretty soon I'm going to be planting up those spring bulbs. Let me know if you want me to make a video on that and just showing you what I have left and if you want to follow the progress on those bulbs because you might think that it's too late to plant spring bulbs, but again, I've planted them in January and February. And this is true for my climate and given our situation. But I've done that before in February and they're already blooming, and yet I can't bring them outside. So it kind of makes sense for me to be potting up spring bulbs in March so that I can enjoy them in April. I will definitely be doing that this year. And if that's the case, that I have the best display this year because I planted bulbs in March, then going forward, for me, if I want to do that, if I want to have those beautiful bulbs in pots, kind of like Klaus, I think it's Dalby does. He has that beautiful display of spring bulbs. I want that. I think a lot of us want that if you've ever seen his channel. So that's my plan, to get the rest of my spring bulbs potted up. And in case you're wondering where have I been storing them, I've been storing them in my garage. They've gotten their natural cool period that they needed by just being in the garage. And someone asked me recently, because they said they had some spring bulbs that they never got in the ground, if it was too late to get them in pots. And I said, go for it. You normally don't want to then take those bulbs and store them for a whole nother year. It's usually better to take those bulbs and get them planted, be it out in your landscape or in a pot or a container. I wouldn't recommend storing them for another year if you had bulbs that you bought in the fall time and you're not sure what to do with them. And when it comes to those bulbs that I plant in my pots, in my containers, I then let them basically put all their energy into the leaves and feed the leaves after the blooming is done, like you normally would with any other spring bulb that you have. And I've made videos showing what I do with those bulbs, but I basically save those bulbs so that I can then plant them out again the following year. I don't put them in the ground. You can do that, but I prefer to save those bulbs and repot them. Although I've read in many places where they say that you shouldn't do that, that you should throw out the bulbs or you should plant them in your landscape. But I've had a lot of success just keeping those bulbs over and potting them up over and over again. Okay, we got the rest of those rosemary seeds moved over into this container. There's no guarantee that these will do anything because, like I said, they should have been brought out of the refrigerator a while ago. There is that fine line of making sure that seeds that you put in the refrigerator get a cold enough stratification period, but you don't also want them to be there in there too long because they can rot. So I have plenty of rosemary. I just didn't get around to doing this process with the rest of my seeds. When I do a seedling tour in the future, I'll let you know. I'll give you an update on this. I swear I just checked my tomatoes yesterday and look at the seedlings. They've already started germinating. These are the Big Mama. We had planted the tomato seeds on the 20th of March and today is the 24th. So yeah, they need to be potted up. Let's tackle that right now. We're going to pot up Big Mama seedlings here and I'm going to be potting them up right up to their leaves. And what will happen is that will just make for a sturdier, less leggy seedling. I can't stress this enough. Label, label, label. Especially when it comes to things like tomatoes, if you have a whole bunch that you've started, or peppers, because they all look the same while they're this small. When it comes to pricking out any seedling, including tomato seedlings, you want to handle them by their leaves. You don't want to handle them by their stems. If you handle them by their stems and you crush or break the stem, then the plant's going to die. If you handle it by its leaf and one leaf breaks or falls off, usually the plant will be okay. It will continue to grow. It just needs the leaves in order to photosynthesize. My hope or my goal is to be able to pot it up one more time before it's time to start hardening them off. So from this 6 cell pack, They will stay in here, I'm guessing, for probably 4 weeks, but it's hard to tell. I'm not quite sure. I will keep them in these 6 cell packs until I start noticing roots coming out from the bottom. And if it's just one root or two root, that's not a problem. I want to see a few roots coming out from the bottom. And at that point, these will get potted up into 3-inch pots. Just carefully pulling this out. When it comes to how deep I'm making the holes, it's going to vary from plant to plant. Because the tomato seedlings have a long stem and a long root, I'm actually making the hole all the way to the bottom of this 6 cell pack. And that's because I want to accommodate that full size there of the stem as well as the roots. This space right here is very small. That's why I'm only putting one tomato plant in each cell. There are certain plants that don't grow very fast. Some of the ones that I can think of would be basil or even wax or tuberous begonias. In those cases, when you're potting up, it's okay to put 2 or 3 little seedlings in a small space like that. Another one I can think of would be rosemary or lavender. It's basically plants that grow very slowly, that stay small for a long time. But if you have a plant that grows very fast, you don't want to do that. You don't want to put a number of seedlings in here. You just want to put one at this point. And again, the reason is these little plants are going to need a lot at this point. So you don't want them competing with their neighbors. Someone asked recently about if they have an unheated greenhouse, if they could start their tomatoes out there. Tomatoes, just like peppers, like hot temperature. They like warm temperature. They might be okay, but they might grow a lot slower out there. So you just want to keep that in mind. I've also been asked about winter sowing. Can you winter sow tomatoes? You can. You definitely can. I've never done it, but it is possible. In fact, even with our harsh New England weather that we get with all the snow and the freezing temperature, many times I'll get freebie plants of tomatoes that appear in my yard. So that tells me that you can winter sow a plant like a tomato. I just don't have a lot of experience with winter sowing vegetables, but what I have heard is it's very important to know days of maturity if you are going to winter sow vegetable seeds. That's why that Facebook site that I mentioned, there's a lot of great information on there when it comes to winter sowing vegetable seeds. I wasn't planning on potting up the tomato seedlings. I didn't think that there were that many that had sprouted. So, change of plan, but it's a good thing because the quicker I get these potted up, the happier the tomato seedlings will be. Tomatoes, I mentioned this earlier, but I used to start them much earlier, and I'd get these big, huge plants, and I was trying to stake them, and they were falling over, and yet they were not ready to go out in the landscape for weeks because typically when it comes to these warm-loving plants like tomatoes, a lot of times you don't even want to get them planted in your yard at least 1 or 2 weeks until after your average last frost date. So I've learned to hold back when it comes to plants like tomatoes. And of course, when you do plant them out in your landscape, you can definitely plant them deeper. That's not a problem. This will be my first year selling tomato starts as part of my backyard plant nursery. I'm really excited. Last year, it was my first year selling any vegetable plants. I normally sell just perennial flowers, but there was a lot of interest for the vegetable plants, especially tomatoes. And a number of you had suggested some good varieties to try. So I'm excited. I'm excited not only for myself to try these varieties, but also to offer them for sale for anyone that lives locally. I have no idea how much to price my tomato starts for. I'll probably have to go to local garden centers and just kind of get an idea of how much they're selling them for. But because some of these varieties are a little bit different, ones that you don't normally find, and some of them are heirloom, I'm guessing that I should be able to get okay money for them. It's just going to be a fun process for me to be able to offer them locally. And I think people that will be stopping by to look at these will appreciate that some of these are hard to find plants. Well, you can see in this tray, clearly there's a winner with one of the tomatoes that has just decided to wake up. That is called Big Boy. My cousin recently asked me who does the camera angles and holds the camera when I'm videoing. And I laughed and I told him 99% of the time it's me. I just set up the tripod and do all of that. But my husband just came up for a tea and he goes, I think your head was kind of cut off. I said, oh, well, it happens. So I think he might have adjusted it. But yeah, it's funny that out of these 4 different varieties of tomato, the big boy is taking off just like that. So I have some really fun things planned for this year, and I'm hoping I can get to the ones that I really want to do. One of them is upstairs off my bedroom, I have a balcony. And it's a balcony I do like to go out and I feed the birds out there. So I go out there almost every day to fill up the bird feeders. And I do like to go out there every so often and sit out there and just look downstairs where like I can see my big hosta garden is out there. I can enjoy that. But I really want to be out there more often. I really want to sit out there during the warm summer nights and enjoy my backyard. So one way of motivating myself to do that is I want to clean it up. So that entails really power washing it because it needs a good power washing. And then I'm also going to look around and see if I can find an outdoor rug that would be able to fit that space. Usually Ocean State Job Lot, which is a store close to me, they have lots of different rugs, including outdoor rugs at a reasonable price. So I'm going to start there first. And I want to find an outdoor rug. I want to find a couple of chairs because the chairs I've been using, they don't match. They're like the cheap plastic chairs that you can usually find like at Walmart. And I believe I got them from my mother-in-law's. And like I said, they don't even match. So yes, I could take a power washer to them and clean them. But if I can find something different, that would be nice. But my main goal for that space is to add to it. Normally, every year, I put window boxes up there. And I think that area gets a good amount of sun. So I usually do put sun loving plants up there, and they do really well, like petunias. I'm planning on doing a lot of container gardening in that space. And I don't know the dimensions of it, but I'll be making a series of basically how to garden in a small space like that. If all you have is a small balcony to garden off of, or a small porch, and that's all you have, and you're growing in containers. Because I want to be able to fill up that space and really enjoy it. And I want to have a lot of different vegetables growing up there as well as flowers. And I want to push myself to do a lot of container gardening up there in that small space. So be on the lookout for that series. I'm really excited about that. And I think it will then cause me to slow down and really enjoy my own garden, which I think a lot of us gardeners have a hard time doing because we're always so busy working on seedlings and potting up and fertilizing that it's hard for us to sometimes just slow down and enjoy our own space. Again, it's very important to label, so I'm going to be putting big boy in these ones. Now that many of us are well into our way when it comes to seed starting, I wanted to talk about something that I feel really passionately about, and that is growing things that you enjoy. I might have said this in other videos, but when it comes to how much space we have in our yards or how much space we have in our grow rooms, as well as how much time do we have, and then throw in how much of a budget do we have for gardening. It is so important to really grow the things that you love. I think it's nice to experiment and try different things, but it also is important to know how much time do you have, how much space you have, all those factors, and really grow the things that you love. Because otherwise, what might end up happening is you're growing something because maybe your friend or your neighbor or a family member or someone that you saw on YouTube is growing, and so you feel that you need to grow that also. But then by the end of summer, you're kicking yourself going, why did I grow that? Why did I spend the time or the space or the money on that plant? So as you start to garden more, really look back at this year and see the things that you're growing, and then ask yourself, was it worth it? Do I want to grow it again next year? Or do I want to dedicate my space, my time, my money towards a different plant? Someone asked me recently if I've ever grown statice. And I said I grew it one year. It was probably 2 years ago. And the only reason I grew it, other than the fact that I think I've seen it in dry flower arrangements, but I grew it because I saw a lot of cut flower farmers growing it, people that are growing it to be able to sell. And so that encouraged, motivated, influenced me to try to grow it myself. The reality is I have some full sun. I don't have a ton of full sun in my yard. And I definitely don't have an area where I can make a dedicated cut flower garden. And since I don't have a lot of sun, I don't want to give up my sun just for that space. So I grew a whole bunch of it, and then I never really even got it in the ground. So I wasted a lot of grow light space, a lot of time. It wasn't necessarily a lot of money because I just bought, I think, 1 or 2 packets of seed from a local store. So I'm thinking of maybe doing something like a seed starting postmortem. That word always sounds so negative. But we used to do that when I was a software engineer. We would have meetings, but we call them postmortem. It's just learning about um, how something went and how can we change it. And we even did that when I was coaching robotics after a competition. We would get together and we would talk about what worked, what didn't work, and how can we improve it. And I think it would be nice to do that. I would love to do that for my channel, to have a seed starting postmortem where I have you share with me what worked, what didn't work, and what would you change. And that way we can all share that with each other and learn from each other. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a good idea for us to do something like that. And I can come up with a better word if that sounds too depressing and sad. But it's basically a seed starting postmortem. And if you like that idea, we could even do something like a winter sowing postmortem. So I'll be honest, another reason why I'm not bottom watering using my 10 by 20 trays is because since they are nothing fancy, they're not a bootstrap farmer or a similar type of 10 by 20 tray, they tend to break. And I think anyone that has ever bought them knows what I'm talking about. You get what you pay for. But also, at least at this point, I've been gardening for 30 years and I just personally, I don't want to invest the money on the more expensive trays and pots. I just think that I'd rather spend my money elsewhere. So for me right now, I've been able to salvage and use these type of trays. And Mr. Budget Gardener said that he thinks he can pretty easily fix all of them. So once he starts tackling that, which should be very soon, I'll share with you what we end up doing to do that. Because the reality is not all of us can afford really expensive pots and trays and things like that. And I get it, these aren't very pretty looking, but I typically can get a lot of these, like these 6 cell packs for free. Maybe I buy a 6 cell pack of plants and now I have a free tray, or my neighbor does, or my family member. You know, I usually can get them for free. So I'd rather just reuse rather than just buy, but I definitely am not knocking anyone that wants to buy those really pretty trays and pots. I'm just explaining why I like to reuse what I have. So with that said, I am going to try to have my husband help me fix all my 10 by 20 trays. They're not all broken, but some of them are. And so what happens is when you go to bottom water, there's maybe a little break in the bottom. And so now the water is going everywhere. So we just need to spend the time. And what we're going to do is we're going to take each tray and we're going to hold it up just against some light, sunlight, or these lights here. And if we see a tiny little pinhole, we're going to try to fix those. And I'll make another video showing you what we end up doing. That's just always been important to me, is to just reuse things that I already have. Definitely those sturdier trays and pots, I'm sure would last you a long time. I don't necessarily feel they're going to make better plants. I feel strongly that you can make just as good of a plant inside of a yogurt container, for example. Someone asked a question recently about fertilizing, that when it comes to fertilizing the plants, can we just fertilize from above? For example, if you have a watering can and you've mixed fertilizer in it, can you just pour that on top? Now, if you have a very small plant or a small seedling, it really is better to bottom water, because when you water from above, it can cause a lot of issues like fungal diseases. It can cause damping off. So that's why you want to mix your fertilizer in with your water, but then bottom water the tray with that. Once the plants have gotten a nice, decent size, a nice big size, at that point, it's totally okay to water from above. You never want to get the water on the leaves. You want to still water at the base of the plant, but you want to be doing that once your plant is a nice size plant. As I'm potting up these tomato seedlings, there are some situations like this gardener's delight. There were only 2 plants that have come up that are a good size, and I've potted them up, but I'm gonna leave the rest of the cells empty. I'm keeping it in this tray with a whole bunch of other tomato plants in there, all different varieties, but I'm especially making sure that each 6 cell pack is labeled. So this one is Gardener's Delight. There are only 2 seedlings in it, and I still have 4 spaces for more Gardener's Delight to go in here. And then I have another tray here that's called Big Boy, and this also has 3 seedlings in it. It's labeled Big Boy, and then I left 3 spots there. Lots of different ways you can do it, but that's how I'm doing it. It's gonna save me space in the short run because I'm putting all different varieties of plants in here, but I'm making sure that each of my 6 cell packs has a label in it. And then also that allows me to prick out seedlings that are getting taller that really need to be taken out of here. But then I'm making sure that I'm leaving the rest of them alone, covering this back up, and then this can go back on my seedling heat mat. If I was to leave these alone and not prick out any seedlings, and I have some that are getting tall in here, what would happen is with those taller seedlings that have already started sprouting out, they're not going to be happy with that humidity dome on. They're not going to be happy with the seedling heat mat beneath them. If I keep the humidity dome on here with these little seedlings that are emerging, what will happen is it's going to be too humid in there for them. And that's when the damping off can take them out. The seeds that have not germinated in here would be fine. It's the plants that are coming up that would not be fine. So once they're starting to emerge and they've put on some growth, that's when you want to get them out of there. And if these seedlings that are emerging continue to stay on the seedling heat mat for too long, even though they like warmth, they will end up stretching and becoming leggy. And there are some other seeds that have germinated, but the plants are very, very small still. I can leave them alone. They will be fine, and most likely tonight or tomorrow, those plants can be pricked out. But due to timing and everything else, I can just leave them in here for right now because they're just barely starting to sprout. I'm excited to be trying the Dollar Tree Roma tomatoes. It'll be good to see how they do, but I can tell you right now I have very good germination going on. Since I'm 8 weeks away from my average last frost date, I am going to start waking up a bunch of my corms, bulbs, tubers that I overwintered in my garage. I recently showed you the reasons why you want to start pre-sprouting or waking up dahlia tubers. I just released that video recently, but I also will be doing the same with other types of bulbs that I overwintered in my garage. And some of those include calla lilies, canna lilies. There's a whole bunch of things I'll be waking up out there. And that video will apply to you even if you didn't overwinter them and you just recently bought them and you're not sure how to plant them. I'll show you in those videos my process for waking those tubers or bulbs up. Well, that does it for today. I got a lot potted up. I'm so excited, and I'm really hoping that you enjoyed this video, that you learned something new. As always, if you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.